Welcome to the Mindful Movement Show. We're your hosts, Tony and Amanda Johnson.
This is a podcast dedicated to helping moms and dads heal their hurts, transform their health from the inside out, and become the best people, partners, and parents they can possibly be.
Our mission is to normalize struggle and profile stories of resilience, character building, and the process of healing and becoming.
In Season 1, we spotlight healers from a variety of modalities who are also parents. We hope you enjoy the show. Welcome, everybody. It is my pleasure to welcome Jackie Brooker. She is the owner of Yoga John in San Diego, California. She is also a wife and a mother to her 1-year-old son, Jack. And her mission is to serve as many people as possible while remaining true and authentic to herself. She aspires to help people find their center and awaken a passion for living healthy and fulfilling lives.
We are honored to say that we've watched the evolution of her life, family, and business in the 6 years that we've been friends. Jackie performed a very special yoga class for us during our wedding party, the day that we were married. She has helped our business grow from its infancy. She also met her husband, got married, and had their first child around the same time that we were doing those things. So we've been able to grow together in many ways. We're so grateful to have her on the podcast, and we look forward to discussing the evolution of her journey as a person, a mom, a wife, a boss lady, a business owner, and a healer who puts good into the world in so many ways. Jackie, welcome.
Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you. I'm going to need you guys to email me that intro so I can put it on my website. That was amazing. Thank you.
We got you.
Yeah.
And, I think we always start our podcast with this question because we firmly believe that our experiences shape who we are and how we show up in the world. So can you please tell us a bit about your upbringing and how your experiences shape how you show up in the world as a person, a parent, a partner, and a teacher?
There's so many, little things that make me who I am along the way. But I did think a lot about this when we initially had talked about doing this podcast together, because it's a really deep question, but it can also just be like a quick answer. I grew up on the East Coast, and I think having East Coast parents that are like working class, like Philadelphia born and bred people really did shape a lot of who I was. I'm very much like a type A, like let's go, go, go kind of person. But I was also raised by two extraordinarily strong-willed people. As a result of them being two strong-willed people, I am a child of divorce. So that was a big part of shaping my adolescence. That happened when I was 3. And so there was a lot of observing what different people needed at different times from me, which I guess some people might say like, oh, that's a shame you were a child, you had to go through that. But I think it makes me who I am because I'm observant. I'm like, okay, what does this person need? What does that person need? And how do I fit into that? I was surrounded by a lot of entrepreneurship growing up. My grandparents own their own real estate brokerage. My stepmother owns her own real estate brokerage. I have a lot of friends that own businesses. And it was always something that I felt like I could do, but I needed permission to do. And it took me a while to like get comfortable in those shoes of being like my own boss. But there's definitely an independent streak in who I am. And that comes from who raised me, where I was raised, and how they raised me, which was very much a, kind of do your thing, take care of you. Like, we're here for you, but go ahead. And that I think I struggled to kind of deal with a lot in the beginning of my life. But now I'm thankful for it because now I'm like, all right, like, let's go. Like, this is what we do now. Like, you ask your questions, you get your answers, and then we move forward. And a lot of people have in my business been like, how did you figure this out? And I'm like, I literally Googled it or got on the phone and said like, hey, how did you do that? And it's how I built my whole business. And it's how I've built my whole life too. Like, I landed in California because I called my cousin that moved out here and I was like, hey, how'd you do that? And then I ended up meeting my husband and we have so many adventures together, but a lot of that independence comes from my parents and the region of the country that I grew up in, I think too. Yeah.
Thank you for such an honest and open share. I want to ask a follow-up question about being strong-willed and independent. You mentioned that because we're raising 2 children that are very much nurtured and natured to be strong-willed. Mm-hmm. And on the parent side of that comes with great challenge in the sense that we must create and foster space for their growth And that requires us to do some growing in terms of, and I don't want to speak for Amanda, but me in terms of my patience and in terms of my approach and in terms of my level of flexibility when it comes to having no control over the particular situations that are happening. Can you talk about the ways in which being strong-willed and independent were a struggle when you were younger? And then give me some examples of how it benefits you today.
I was an outcast because of it. Everybody wanted to go right. And I was like, ooh, what's left? And then I would turn left and everybody would be over there. And I'd be like, why am I by myself? And I didn't understand for a really long time growing up in my teen years and my prepubescent years that turning left when other people go right is really a gift, because when you're growing up and you're being, kind of developing by what's going on with your peers and comparison that way, it doesn't make sense why no one's like following you to go this different direction. And I thought that there was something wrong with me, and I thought that I was like this weird person. And it has really flipped 180 degrees since I've come into my own in adulthood, and it's been a gift because I have taken that left turn when other people go right, and I find things that other people don't know are there. And I find pathways that exist that I'm not afraid to step into, because I'm like, oh, I'm already here by myself. Might as well keep going. And that's life, love, and all like friendships and relationships too. And I am grateful that it doesn't terrify me to be doing things by my own out on a limb.
I think that is so incredibly powerful and amazing in a world where, especially, raising two little girls, growing up as a woman myself, you're constantly told to fit this mold or to fit in. And I think that is so inspiring that you have found a different way to look at that and to challenge the world and to embody this idea of saying, well, and I even think about where you teach your yoga classes, like, because you're so, I don't know, to me, you seem so self-confident. Like, I've always seen you as this like incredibly confident, like amazing yoga boss lady. Like you just think of things that other people don't. You really do make your own path. And I think that is so cool.
And it's a great message to the listeners.
Absolutely.
Which is, in a world of people trying to fit in, what would it look like to stand out?
Yeah.
And what would it look like to blaze your own trail?
It is terrifying. I don't want people to think I'm not scared. I'm very scared most of the time, but it's rewarding just as much so. But yes, go on.
That's a great thing.
Well, and we'll get into that
Yeah.
too, because, for those who don't know, Jackie and her husband have traveled the United States with their toddler during the pandemic. Infant, rather. This woman has built a business from literally nothing. And we'll get into some of those struggles and we'll get into some of those fears. But before we go there, I actually want to back up and talk about your mission and what Yoga John is and who it benefits and things of that nature. Because Amanda and I have been really blessed to benefit from the way you approach teaching and yoga and your voice and your music selection. What inspires you to put good into the world every day?
People need a space to take up space. For a really long time, I mentioned earlier, I felt like I didn't have somewhere to call my own. I didn't have a place where I felt like I could go by myself and be by myself, but like also be with a community that was on the same vibe as me. I know what it feels like to be trying something for the first time and be really scared and nervous, especially when it comes to movement, races or different kinds of fun movement like aerial yoga or something of that sort. The first time you try anything, it's really intimidating because you feel like you're surrounded by people that know everything that they're doing. And I remember I went to my first few yoga classes in college, and the teacher used Sanskrit. And I kind of go back and forth about how I feel about using Sanskrit versus like, is it helpful to not use it for people who are opening up to yoga, or is it like cultural appropriation to not use it? And I go back and forth. And what I've landed on is that people need a stepping stone to get into movement. If I was intimidated by, intense poses and Sanskrit names and, the spiritual side of yoga at my first class, I can only imagine what some other people might feel. And I know what happens when you can get deep into the study of yoga and breath work and meditation and what can open for you. But in order to get there, you have to walk through the door. So I have made it a goal to give people a space to walk through the door, to come, to try it out, to check it out. And then when they come to me and they're like, hey, can you recommend a yoga studio? Or, hey, I want to be a yoga teacher. I'm like, perfect. I've got the person for you. And I point them in the direction of people who I look to as mentors. Like there's a couple of people who I recommend their teacher training to everybody because I know they get into the philosophy and the religious origins of yoga, which I think is super important, but it can be a lot the first time you do it. Outside of yoga, I also do swimming and endurance sports, and I've always taken that approach in those sports as well. People need a space to come in and try something and fail and not be made to feel silly about it. So I've really, really made it my goal to make everybody feel like they belong in the spaces that I create, because I have not always felt that way, and I'm not going to let anybody feel that.
I love that. And I know like we've personally felt that walking into your yoga classes. And I think that it's amazing that not only do you provide a service, but you also help to connect. You know, it seems like you're a connector in that way, where you're open and eager to share, you know, other resources in the community, other teachers. And my experience has been that the yoga community hasn't always been that way. So I think that's very cool that you're like trying to make those connections that way.
Yeah.
And along
no, it
those,
is not.
yeah.
It's not
And these
like
are-
that at all.
These are values that we promote constantly as well. Accessibility, inclusivity, providing a space for people to express themselves creatively or physically without judgment. And that's actually the basis of mindfulness, is present moment awareness without judgment. And good for you for using your own experiences of maybe feeling alienated or feeling intimidated to foster that space. Because without trailblazers like that, I think we have conflict and division. We don't have openness and inclusivity.
I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about the services that you offer throughout San Diego, and maybe about how those offerings kind of serve towards your bigger mission of creating a space for people to take up a space.
Well, I think the big core of what I do is I offer weekly donation-based classes in parks and outdoor spaces. I've been doing that since I took my teacher training. First, I was a student, and then I took a training, and then I became a teacher in those outdoor spaces. And I decided a long time ago that those were going to be pay what you wish classes, and pay what you wish can include zero. If you're familiar with the yoga scene in any major city, it can be really, really expensive to join a yoga studio or even try one. And I've had times in my life where I've been really down and out and broke, and I'm like, man, I wish there was something free to do. That is my way of kind of like giving back to the community and creating that space there. Everybody's welcome. We do have space limits because, you know, for obvious reasons, you can't fit 300 people in a space made for 50. So I ask people to get a free ticket to do that. But that from there, if they're interested in going deeper, I've done classes at different wineries around San Diego, and those come up kind of sporadically. I do the classes at the Carlsbad Flower Fields every spring, which I was just there the other week, and it was like such a metaphor because I got there and I was like expecting flowers, and I got there and it's just dirt everywhere. And I'm like, oh, they're planting the seeds. And then I'm like, oh yeah, they're planting the seeds. We're going to bloom in the spring. And I got like super cheesy about it. But those classes take place every spring. And this year we're going to add kids classes because it's really fun to do movement activities with my son. So I want to offer that for other people too. And then honestly, it's like I do wedding yoga. I do birthday yoga, bachelorette, whatever. Basically, anytime somebody wants to take a yoga class or like try it out and expose their friends to it, I'm down to do it. I also do like swim lessons. I mean, really, my husband's like, so what business are you going to create this month? And I'm like, I don't know. I'll figure it out. But mostly it's yoga. In the summer, it's a lot of swimming. And I'm going to be working with some bigger names coming up in the fall and winter time with some special events we've got cooking. So It's hard to kind of say, what do I offer? It changes every week.
Yeah.
And I actually want to ask a follow-up question related to wedding yoga, both because I know that's a part of your business that you're growing and because it's intimately related to us and our journey and our story. The day that we announced that we were going to have a wedding yoga class for our wedding party before we set up our DIY wedding. It's not like we had a wedding planner or anything like that. We were just all setting it up together. And the day that we announced that we were going to host a yoga class to start and set the tone for the day was the day we encountered great backlash. It's like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? How is that going to help? That's just another thing you're going to do. And honestly, it was...
Don't you need to be getting ready?
It was the best thing we ever could have done.
Yeah.
Because what it did is it got us out of our head and of the planning of the day and the overwhelm that everyone's going to experience. And it allowed us to tap into our bodies and connect with one another. Can you talk about any other experiences you've had working people through a wedding yoga class and how they've commented how it might have set the tone for their day in a meaningful and positive way?
I can see it on a bride's face that their brain is just going, 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 and groom's faces too. I've done mostly, bachelorette and bridal party yogas, but a lot of co-ed yoga classes too. And you can, having gone through a very stressful wedding, we had 3 weddings in my household because not because I married 3 different people, but because that's how extra we are. But the one that we had with everybody there, it was just like this vibrating like tension, and I can see it on people's faces. And by the time they get through a yoga class of movement, and it's a constant reminder, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out at a rhythm that kind of gets you into this Zen state. By the time you're through it, the tension's gone from your body. You still have a to-do list. You know what your to-do list is, but you can attack it in a much more, all right, I have to do this. I have to do this, instead of like this chaos feeling. I've seen the chaos evaporate from people when we bring mindfulness into the day. I know that people get that reaction a lot. You're going to add another thing into your day. You're going to do this. If you take that hour for yourself to be intentional about your breath and your movement and where your mind is, the rest of your day is going to go that much easier, because you start from a place that like is good. You ever hear that saying, you get up and you make your bed, and then like the rest of your day you stay active and you stay like getting things done and checking stuff off your list. Mindfulness is the same thing. You get up and you start your day breathing and being intentional. Everything you do the rest of the day is going to have that same energy. So it's highly recommended. Any kind of stressful event, yoga first, then the to-do list.
And it's interesting, as you're saying that, the thought kind of came up in my mind about how, yeah, the idea that you're just adding one more thing, but when you practice things like yoga, when you add that in, you're actually taking so much out of your day too, right? Like the negativity and stress, maybe like bad self-talk. So it's like, even though it is one more thing in a way, it also takes out a bunch of stuff that you don't need either.
The Dalai Lama is famously quoted as saying, "Each day I meditate for an hour, except on days where I'm busy, then I must meditate for 2."
Yeah.
Which isn't to say everyone who's listening is going to meditate for 2 hours on their busy day, but it is to say that when we stop, we slow down, we be with our body and breath, it can create space for us to move about our day in a more peaceful, intentional way.
Yeah, like I'm very busy just like as another example of this, when you have a kid, as you guys know, I kept telling myself I couldn't take any time for myself when he was born, and it led to some like scary, anxious, depressed places. Yeah. And then I made a commitment, 15 minutes of movement in the morning, and it ended up being a dog walk. And that 15 minutes, if I didn't take it, by 11 a.m., you could tell that I did not take that 15 minutes for myself in the morning. So
interesting.
It makes the space for you to have a better day.
No, thank you so much for sharing that, because so many of our clients look to us for accountability, when in reality, all we do is say, when are you going to create space for you to do you in a meaningful way, even if it's 5 minutes, even if it's 15 minutes, even if it's just drinking some water every time after you send a text message. And on that note, you're talking about creating space for yourself as a person, balanced with your role as a mother and a partner. I want to talk about your relationship with Jack. You know, he's a young little boy, but I want you to tell me some of the greatest moments or experiences you've shared with your son and your husband.
Oh, how long can this answer be? He is really just the brightest light and the coolest mirror, and I get to relive the happiest part of my youth by hanging out with him, which is a gift that I didn't anticipate. But my favorite memories with him, I mean, we travel a lot, right? So this kid has been to like 6 national parks. He's been on like a bunch of different RV trips, but the moments that I really, really treasure with him are just like, we could be sitting there. I remember this time we were in Palm Desert out by Joshua Tree last winter, and he was still sitting and not crawling, which is like, that's like the golden period of parenting. They can sit, but they're not walking.
Absolutely.
And we had just gotten him this little bag of instruments, and I was like, oh, whatever. Like, this will probably be annoying because he's gonna bang everywhere, whatever. But like, here, like, play with it. And he had this cymbal, and I remember he was taking his finger, and he went, like that. And he was learning that that made the instrument do something. And that moment to me, it just sticks out as such an example of what being a mom and how cool it is, because I forget that he doesn't know that his finger does that. And he doesn't know when he, goes to a museum and he spins this tube that that thing over there is going to move, and you see them make that connections, and then their eyes get big and it's like, oh my God, you're so cool. And I know this is like such a like mom answer, but watching him create those little wrinkles in his brain anytime I can do that. And I was exhausted this morning and I got up and I was like, we're going to the Children's Museum and he's going to climb on everything and it's going to be amazing. And there's like this little kid inside of me that's like, it's really cool to watch a human being go from this little blob that doesn't even like have eyes that work that well into a creature that's making a decision to climb up a ladder. I'm like, how are you even real? How are you even real? It's really cool.
Totally.
And you can call your answer a mom answer, but as a dad, the most beautiful part of watching life unfold is seeing the awe and the wonder in that little child's eyes.
Yeah.
And watching them connect with the world and experience the best it has to offer is the most inspiring thing, because it takes what we learn in mindfulness practice as a theory. What would it be like if you experienced the world as if it was the first time you experienced it each and every time, and it puts it into reality? Mm-hmm. And so thank you so much for sharing that, because I think moms, dads, any sort of parent could benefit from that perspective, that all too often we get so bogged down and so stressed by the demands and the responsibilities of keeping this young person alive that we fail to recognize the magic that's happening before our very eyes, the new neural connections that are building every moment and every experience. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
No, it's really like we went today to the Children's Museum and there's this tube with a fan underneath of it, and you take a scarf and the scarf floats up the tube and comes out the top and then comes back down. I have a video of him just watching and going up and around and looking, and it was just magic. And I say this a lot in my yoga classes, there's no better mindfulness teacher than a small child, because you have no choice but to stay in the moment with them. And it used to confuse me with my friends with kids, like, oh, how can you look at your phone and then forget to text somebody back? And I'm not mad at you, but like, it didn't make sense to me. And it's because your child does not care what's on your phone. You're going to look at your phone and be like, oh, I should text that person back. And then they're going to pull you right back into the moment with whatever it is they're doing. And as a mom, a dad, parent, grandparent, whatever, go with them, because there's going to be a time where they don't want you to go with them. So just like get in there with it, Well,
and another interesting thing that I found with parenting, talking about mindfulness, is the idea that they don't have a concept of time when they're really little. Mm-mm. And so it's just fascinating to see this little person, when we say, Emery, okay, we need to put on your shoes. It's time to go to school. It's like, to her, that could be 30 minutes. That could be tomorrow. And so one of the ways that I feel like I've had to grow and challenge myself as a parent is to also not rush that, right? That every moment to them is so sweet, because like you said, that's all that they have. That's all that they know. They're not thinking about a deadline or a timeline. And so in many ways, they are just like the coolest little teachers too.
And I'm glad you got to enjoy the Children's Museum with them.
Yes. And so kind of shifting here, I'm curious if you can maybe, on the other side of the coin, share maybe some dark or tough moments that you've had as a parent.
Specifically because we all became first-time parents during the pandemic.
Yes.
And so that's something we want to speak to, because a central takeaway we hope to share with parents, is especially first-time parents during the pandemic, is that we're not alone in our pain, and that there is consciousness raising and solidarity that can happen through sharing your stories. So to the extent that you're comfortable, please share some of the darker or challenging moments that you've had.
I mean, it was the loneliness. The pandemic loneliness. And then I mentioned earlier, I'm super type A. I love to plan. I love to go, go, go. And so when I found out I was pregnant, first of all, I have to tell you where I found out I was pregnant for you to fully grasp with the enormity of this. So it's the middle of the pandemic, right? We were in this apartment building that was just swarming with Airbnbs, and we're still like social distancing at this point. And I'm getting paranoid. All these people are going to get us sick. So we break our lease, buy an RV, and we're like, we're going to travel to like these remote out there lands and no one's going to bother us and it's going to be great. So we're like going to Tahoe, we're up in the Sierras, we're going to Yellowstone, we're in Idaho at one point. We're just going everywhere. And so we're camping in like it's a 15-minute drive to a gas station. That's how far
wow.
out there we are
Okay.
in Montana. And we're like down this dirt road, we're in the RV, and I take a pregnancy test and I'm like, oh my God, it's positive. I'm in the middle of Montana, homeless, technically homeless. And I'm not really sure, like I'm at the time I'm working this job. Like I went back to my corporate job and I'm like, I don't know, is it permanent? Is it not permanent? Because I was like in this temp status and then like
Yes.
I might be out of a job soon and I'm pregnant and there's a pandemic and what am I going to do? And so once I get through all of that, this is like, fall of 2020. So we're still really in the thick of it. Things are really bad. We don't have a vaccine yet. Still don't know a lot of what we know now. Things were very scary. I actually got laid off a week after I told them that I was pregnant, which is very surprisingly common. And they told me that I could stay on and work an extra month, but at the end of that month, I was going to be done. So I got all freaked out and didn't rock any boats because I needed that money. But so now I'm pregnant, I'm unemployed, I'm homeless, there's a pandemic, and every book I'm reading says build a community. And I'm like, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't do that right now. Or like my favorite is like, and this is where you probably saw on my social media, I was like, I don't want your unsolicited advice.
Yes.
When I was pregnant, that became a really big deal for me because people would be like, oh, just go get a massage. And I'm like, where? Where would you like me to go get a massage? Everything's closed. Go get a pedicure. And I'm like, we don't know what's going on with pregnant women yet. I'm like, well, am I okay? Am I not okay? Well, let me not risk it.
Yeah.
My baby shower is online. The people that I wanted to meet my son did it through a screen. I am still really mad about it. And while this isn't so much Jack directly, it's more, and it's like parenthood during a pandemic, I think that really has been dark for me. Jack has been the lightest part. And before I had a son, I'd heard of postpartum depression and I thought it was in some cases it is struggling to connect with your child. So when I connected deeply with him, I was like, oh, I'm fine. Like, I love this kid so much. I'm totally good. I wasn't looking at what was happening outside of that. And then it caught up with me. And I like went through some really, really bad times, lots of arguing in this house, lots of yelling over like nothing. And we were alone during all of it. Everyone's like, surround yourself with a community, like get people to help you. And like, we're across the country from our parents and it's a pandemic and they're not coming to us. And I mourn what I thought early parenthood was going to look like. You both know me fairly well. I'm a pretty social person. I have a big network of people and I had envisioned having a baby shower that was like called Baby on Blanc and it would be a white party and it would be so corny and fun and I was going to get cake pop. I literally have a Pinterest board that I can't even look at because it's that heavy for me. Like I'm really sad. And now, it was dark, but I was thinking about this today on the elevator because after we left the Children's Museum, there was a coffee shop next to where my car was parked. So I popped in, got a bagel and a little cake pop, and I got Jack a milk, and we sat outside and I watched him eat his little muffin and drink his little milk with the straw. And I didn't even realize it, but when I came back into myself, I realized I was sitting there with this huge grin on my face because those moments mean so much to me now. I wasn't sure if I was ever going to get them. And I'm able to really be in it when I'm inside a children's museum, which is something that still truthfully does freak me out when it comes to getting sick and it comes to the pandemic. But the way that like he lights up when he's in them, like it's enough for me to be like, this is worth the risk for just this moment to be here and let him like run around. And there is always kind of like this dark cloud for me that's like, are we going to get sick? Is the world going to end? Like, is there like the economy okay? Is there a war that's breaking out? And, I can't even get into what has happened in some of the schools, but there's a lot to be scared about being a parent. And it's mostly because I love my son so much and because I wanted it to be so much more. So getting through those dark phases of being a pandemic parent alone, I just never want to be alone as a parent again.
I'm so grateful that you are willing to share your experience. I can't imagine how challenging that was for you. I know we went through a different experience, but, along the same lines of being pandemic parents. And it's a really wild thing when you read all the books, you do everything that we talked for a while, a couple years, like from the time, even before we were engaged, we talked about kids. And never did I think that raising a child would start welcoming them into the world during a pandemic, or in our case, right before one. I just want to thank you for sharing, because it can be challenging to speak your truth and say that it can feel lonely or isolating. And
those are things that we definitely identify
Yeah.
with, because the first 4 months of Emery's life, we didn't see a single person except my mom through a window.
It makes
I
you
think
want to
the
cry,
last time
doesn't
when
it?
Yeah.
the last time we spoke, we mentioned and we talked at length about the things you miss out on, and you actually like lit a light bulb in my head. Like, I had never thought about that, like times by the pool, or going out to the beach, like all those things that we were in survival mode and getting through each moment and getting through each day, that 2 years later it's like, yeah, I am mad about that. I didn't get to go like take the kid to the park and interact with,
Or do like parents groups, or
I am so mad that I couldn't join a mom's group. I needed a mom's group so badly, and I'm so mad about that. Yes.
And there is something about online communities are wonderful, and that is something that we're trying to create here. And I think that in many ways, the pandemic was the beginning of questioning, well, what does a community even mean? How can we try to create a new type of community?
And how can we build meaningful connections even where we're not physically present? And we're grateful for all those things. But even just last Friday, we took Emery to her school's Fall Harvest Festival.
Oh, yes.
And there was something tangible about being with other people that are our age and seeing them interact with their kids and watching Emery light up as she's going down the slide with a bunch of fourth graders. And it was just calming, and in your words, we had big giant smiles, and we would look at each other and we would say, this is what it's about, and this is what we were deprived of. And it gives you that much more appreciation and gratitude that you might not have otherwise had.
100%.
Yeah, you really spoke to that as well, that having gone through an experience like that, then when you do get the simplest things, like sitting on a bench and watching him drink his milk and eat his little muffin.
And the little straw, and he's like sitting there. I was like, this is the best day ever.
Yes. Isn't that just, I love that.
And not everyone is where we're at in terms of our level of healing from the loneliness that's caused by the pandemic or otherwise. And so you're going to touch on other pain points that you help people through. But one of my favorite quotes that we've touched on it multiple times is a quote by Brene Brown. And she quotes that pain only becomes shame when you feel like you're alone in it. So can you tell us about how you've been able to be vulnerable with your community of students, and the ways in which telling your story in an authentic way can help you heal or cope with what you're going through?
I mean, I am very, very honest when I stand in front of my yoga classes. There's been several times where I've thought to myself, all right, it's obvious this is happening in the world, whatever it is. It's really hard for me to talk about, but around the times of school shootings, or several years ago, there was a shooting at a yoga teacher training and 2 people died. And I've thought to myself, do I talk about this? Do I talk about my honest feelings about it in front of my yoga class? Or even like when Omicron broke out and I had come back to teaching and decided I'm not ready yet. Like, this Omicron breakout happened. I'm taking a month and a half off, and people got really mad at me for that. That's a whole nother thing. But like, I am going to be honest with people, and it's helped because there was a lot of fear around this elementary school in Texas. It really broke me because it was my first time seeing that news and having a child, which I think always kind of hits a little bit different. And so I got up and I talked in front of my class about how it felt and what I wish would change. And I actually said what my solution was, which is I think there needs to be some sort of control on the guns. And I was really scared to say that because it's a hot topic and not everybody agrees, and it is what it is. But I wanted to be truthful about where I stood at it. And people came up to me after that class with tears in their eyes and like hugging me and just saying like, thank you for giving me a space to like think about that and think about those kids and think about my own kids and like do something while I'm thinking about it and have that breath to movement practice. Because I said it at the beginning and I said, I can't hold this space for you guys without being truthful about what's going on in my head. And that's happened a couple of different times where I have to say something. And every single time someone comes up to me and shares with me that they're in it too. And so it's really just taught me that like being authentic and being vulnerable is what builds a community and it is what makes people feel comfortable around me. And I do, make jokes and have fun, but I'm also very honest about my stance on things. And you know where I stand on pretty much every issue if you're my friend, because I don't hide it. I'm working on not being judgmental towards others if their views are different than mine. And that's definitely a growth piece for me for sure in the last few years. But sharing those things brings people to me in a way that I need in those moments.
That's beautiful.
So,
And it almost speaks to the idea that by sharing your vulnerability, it sounds like you're able to create an even more supportive community.
I am.
That's what comes
And a
to
lot
mind.
of the people that I've talked to in those after class moments where we're sharing our thoughts and we're, crying or hugging, whatever, like these are people that I like regularly communicate through social media now, even if they're not coming to my classes. Like I respond to their stories with their kids and like,
Oh,
I know like what's going on with them. They know what's going on with me and Jack. And like it's given me, like I had a birthday party for the first time this year. And all of the people in that photo that I posted on social media from my birthday party were people that I made friends with in this community since I came back after having a baby. These are all new friends because it kind
wow.
of everybody like moved away and, is somewhere else now. So, and these are all people that we've been able to have those vulnerable moments with each other. They've found comfort in me. I found comfort in them. And now we, hang out and get weird together. So,
Oh, I love that.
That's awesome.
Well, I'm wondering if we can transition a little bit to talk about your marriage, actually. So
ooh.
I'm curious, being that you are the boss lady that you are, how has your marriage been influenced or affected by your desire to be an entrepreneur? I'm really curious if you can share a little bit about that.
I have kind of like a unicorn of a husband. I'm going to say that because I don't think I would be as successful in my entrepreneurship if I didn't have the relationship that I have. I've always had the brain that I have. I've always had the eagerness that I have right now. But in my marriage to Nate, I had all of those things and I had somebody giving me a scoot up and saying, well, try it. I'm here. If you need me, I'm down here, but give it a shot. And then I go for things and I know he's got me if I need somewhere to crash back down to, if I like totally royally screw it up. And there's been moments where I totally royally screw it up and like I'm overdrafted on my account and my credit card bill is late and entrepreneurship is very expensive, right?
Yeah.
And then we sit down and we figure it out and one of us picks up an extra way to make money and we always figure it out. Having that support there from Nate has made me a better entrepreneur. It's made me more confident in my risk taking in owning a business because I know that he's got my back in it 100%. And I really truly didn't think that I would ever meet somebody that understood the way that my brain works in the way that Nate does. He just gets it. Like we'll be sitting, it's really like maybe you guys have seen it, but like we'll go out and have a drink somewhere and I'll look around and I'll see a space and I get like quiet and I don't realize I'm doing it. And then he like looks at me and he like comes around, he gets in my eye line and he's like, are you thinking about yoga? Because he knows he can see it on my face and I'll look at something and I'll be thinking like, oh man, we could do an event here. We could do this. We could do that. Because that's kind of like the creativity of entrepreneurship hits you when you least expect it. Tony and I have talked about this before. You have to do it right then and there or write it down or whatever, because you don't know when these things are going to hit you. And
Yeah.
he sees when they hit me and he lets me we do these dream big conversations where I'm like, we could do this or we could do that or we could do. I am an entrepreneur only because of the support that he's given me. So, I mean, it's definitely been challenging financially. There's been times where like I'm not bringing anything in and I'm like, just give me a minute. Just like, I know it's coming. Like, let me just kind of like lean into this a little bit more. And like, he's the kind of husband that like has picked up overtime shifts so that I have a little bit more space and a little bit more time to figure out what it is that I'm figuring out. And there was a time right before I worked, I got connected with the flower fields in Carlsbad, which has to date been my most successful series of events every year. But before I secured that, I was like, I got to get a job. Like, I don't know what's going on. I'm like not bringing any money in. He was like, look, can you promise me that you're going to like lean in and like start cold calling people and doing whatever it is you need to do? And I was like, yes. And he was like, all right, give yourself 3 more months. And he worked overtime.
Wow.
And I was able to secure some corporate clients. And then I landed the flower fields. And then I never ended up having to go back to an office because I was given that time to figure it out. And that's, if you're in a relationship with an entrepreneur, it is truly the best gift you can give them is a little bit more space and time. Even when you're like, oh, I don't know, like it's really, really tight, just give them that little bit more, that space and that confidence that you have in them. It helps create things.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I have a follow-up question for you because there's always, I feel like when you have kids, there's always that and, right? So just balancing that between you and Nate sounds like obviously an amazing gift, and probably I can't even imagine the amount of work. How does that work when you add in a little person too? You know, you're trying to work, you both have jobs, and you have this little child. So how does that all factor in together?
We are not opposed to screen time.
Okay.
just gonna be honest about that right off the bat. But I'm able to create my own schedule. So for example, today is a Monday. So Sunday afternoon, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning are what I call me and Jack time. So it's when I take him to the zoo, and like we're lucky we have a kid that takes a nice big chunk of a nap in the middle of the day, but that morning time he's like a maniac of a toddler and like, whoa, pay attention to me. So I try Monday through Wednesday while Nita's working, I'll take Jack out of the house and we'll go to a playground or the zoo or whatever. And then Thursday and Friday while he's home working, Jack is here with him. We're very fortunate that Nate has a work from home job. He had one before the pandemic, so that didn't really change anything for us. But Thursday and Friday morning, he watches Jack. On the weekends, Saturday and Sunday when I'm out teaching, he watches Jack. And then, we alternate bedtime and stuff. And that is a groove that we just kind of found. We didn't really talk about it. And I am, again, unicorn of a husband because we just kind of hit a groove together. After I got medicated, it got a lot easier. I will say that because I was having some rage. All right. Yeah. It happens. Moms out there going through your postpartum. It's not just the sads, it's the angries too. And so that was a really big growth period for both of us. I didn't start working yet. I wasn't teaching yet. And I was just so angry, and I couldn't figure out why. And then both Nate and my dad actually talked to me, and they were like, just try it out, see how you feel about it. And it was like a fog got lifted for me. And then I was like, all right. And then when I was able to hit my groove again, I think Nate was just relieved that I was like a little bit more myself again. And he was like, yeah, man, like go do your entrepreneur things. I got the baby, go do your thing. Like you look stoked. And he was stoked that I was, bringing in money and creating stuff. So the babies do add a challenge, but our situation is for right now good. He's getting to an age where we're going to need somebody to entertain him though more during the day. Cause he's right about to talk, and he's climbing on the counters, and I found him swimming in the bathroom sink last night. So we're talking about maybe exploring some kid like friendly nannies or activities or something, because we can't entertain him while Nate's working anymore. But up until now, it's worked.
Yeah, and there's so much of your story that resonates and that needs to be discussed, especially because so much of it resonates with us and our experience of becoming parents and trying to grow a business that is meaningful and impactful to the world. And doing so as a person who comes from, your experience was divorce due to strong-willed people. My experience was divorce due to emotional abuse. I'll just call it that. Some of the traumas that I've worked through to lose the weight, to heal the hurts. And something you said that needs to be shared is those parts of yourself that you thought you'd healed. Well, having a kid just does something to that. So can you share a little bit about, how this rage manifested, or how having Jack brought out some parts of yourself that you thought you had just kind of worked through or worked away?
Yeah. The way I phrased it was something like nothing shows you your shadows faster than being a parent. You think you healed all this stuff about yourself. I had spent years in therapy. And I think, as a kid, when your parents get divorced, there's a little anger there, right? No matter who you are, you're a kid, you don't understand it. And And there were some things I couldn't do as a kid because it was like, somebody's weekend or whatever. And there were definitely some feelings of, why can't I just have like a normal childhood? I thought I worked through it in therapy. It popped up a little bit in college. I really worked through it in some of my previous relationships. It would always come up in relationships. And then, like I met Nate and we had this great marriage before kids. And I was like, oh, I mastered it. I'm totally fine. And then I had Jack. I've never loved something or someone so deeply. I love this kid more than my own life. That incited some fear in me. And that fear manifested as rage. I was angry that people didn't understand the exact way that I wanted something done. And the reason I wanted it done an exact way was because it was reminding me of something from when I was younger that was the centerpiece of like a fight that my parents had or something. And if we don't do it this way, then there's going to be like an explosion or something like that. And a lot of this was in the back of my mind for a while. I didn't realize that that's where the rage was coming from. But again, once I took the medication and I was able to kind of step back from it a little bit and have a little bit of a breathing room, I was like, oh, I still got to work on this. And it was just a really big reminder and a gift that you're not ever really done becoming a better version of yourself. I thought I checked it off. I was like, I'm good. Look at me. I'm a yoga teacher. I'm married. I live in San Diego. I am good. And then it's a reminder that you have to constantly and consistently work on yourself. I am faced with it regularly. There's times where Jack will do something and he's a toddler and I'll feel that first instinct and that first emotion that comes up first is rage. But now I'm able to be like, get out of here. All right, let's look at what's happening. He's having big emotions. Get on his level. Help him out. But those emotions, I think, are a part of parenting. So whatever it was that you had gone through, whether it were anger or depression or anxiety or whatever, it comes through full force. My advice to anybody going into parenthood, even if you're feeling really good, just get yourself a therapist.
Absolutely, girl.
Just get yourself a therapist because by the time I needed one again, I couldn't find one. There is a shortage of therapists right now, especially in maternal mental health. I kind of had to white knuckle it a little bit until I was able to get some help. So it's been a road, and it's still something I'm dealing with daily, but it's much easier to manage now with medication and therapy and giving it a name. I had a friend that I met up with at a playground and she talked about having rage and having depression and didn't even know that I was going through it myself, but she was talking about her own journey and her own path. And maybe she did know, and that's why she was talking about her own journey and path. And she was like, yeah, when I gave it a name, it made it easier. And I went home and I was like, I've got some postpartum stuff. I just called it my postpartum stuff because it was all the colors of the postpartum. It was depression, anxiety, rage, crying, happiness, what's going on. But giving it a name did really, really help. And not trying to white knuckle it through parenthood because it's a marathon. You gotta take some time to face it before you can get through it.
So many amazing takeaways there. One of the things we say often is you have to name it to tame it, right? That you have to give some sort of marker for what your experience. It's called affect labeling. You have to be able to acknowledge and name your experiences. Otherwise, you're going to remain uncritical and your subconscious mind's going to continue to run unabated. You also mentioned something that's really, really important. That is, your relationship with your child is in many ways a mirror. Not only of the good things that you've mentioned, of the best parts of your adolescent and little person experiences, but also some of the parts of yourself that were a product of unmet needs, or the product of, in your words, not necessarily having the normal childhood. I'm curious, so some of my experiences is the same in the sense that, or at least similar in the sense that my initial reaction will be informed by some of my hurt parts. And once I'm able to create space between initial reaction, and my true self coming out, that's where healing takes place. That's where meaningful connection between me and my child takes place. Can you tell me about one specific time where you may not have been proud of how you acted and how you approached Jack to talk to him about that?
I had a lot of put him in the crib and walk away moments. A lot of put him in the crib and walk away moments. And so he wasn't really in a place at that age where he understood what was happening, but I just, safe sleep space, nothing to choke on, nothing to hurt himself on. He's freaking out. I'm freaking out. we're freaking out because we're co-regulating in a freak out moment. And it's like everything's going haywire. So I would put him in there and I would walk outside and I would just put my feet in the pool downstairs and like take a full minute and just sit there and come back upstairs. And so because he wasn't at a place where I could speak to him, I would be very intentional about the co-regulation energy that I was giving him, because I think that they can feel that in an infancy, like between 3 and 9 months, right? Like they can respond, but they don't really know. They just get vibes. So I was trying to give him good vibes. It's like the simplest term. Hold him on my chest, rub his back, cheek to cheek. And that was my way of like, and I would just be intentional about like sending him those like, Mommy had a freak out, Jack had a freak out. We're both learning how to be a mom or a son, and like everything's okay. We're good. And what's calming him down, I was calming myself down is what I was doing. I remind myself regularly that like we are co-regulating and he is going to regulate to what I do. It's not the other way around. My job is to be the calm for him in his storm, not to join him in there. And it's okay that he has those storms. It's okay that he has those moments. It's okay that I have those moments. But when we come back together, be aware of it, bring it down, and just like let yourself go through the big emotions. And then we're going to calm down together. And maybe as he's older, my plan is to like, talk to him about it once he can understand a conversation. But I think he's getting to that point now, and I'm like really, really being intentional. But there's moments where I'm like, he's fine. Stay calm. It's just what babies do. Like, calm down, Jackie. You're good.
Well, the communication professor in me wants to say that 80% of communication is done non-verbally. And then the more spiritual part of me wants to say that story is an example that all life is energy. Even before we are able to cognitively or rationally produce language, we can send frequencies to each other just by how we interact in the same space, by how we touch, by how we hold each other close. And honestly, if you compare our first child to our second child, in terms of their ability to self-regulate, they're night and day. Why? Because child one was born at the beginning of a pandemic in which we were totally dysregulated relative to how we show up normally to the world. Child two has experienced a much different experience with us as being closer to our highest, most elevated self. I love how you say, it is my job to be the calm in his storm, not to join him in it. And I think that we need to, as parents, all try to practice that a little bit more.
I was just going to say, absolutely, but it is hard, and it's okay if we can't, but try to.
Yes. And I think there's something to be said about, there are things with postpartum depression that are out of your control, and then there are things with postpartum depression that are within your control. And that was something that I learned between my pregnancy with Emery versus Ellie. I experienced postpartum depression with both of them, but the tools that I used to regulate myself, or at least be more mindful with Ellie, were different than with Emery. And I feel like you're speaking to something really powerful, talking about the rage is something that you might not have, like, you can't control that, but what you do with that emotion, how you name it, or deciding to step out is incredibly powerful. And I think that that's a really important takeaway for our listeners, especially our moms, because you can't wish away things like postpartum depression. And you can't wish away even sometimes those emotions, but what you decide to do with them is incredibly powerful.
And an acronym we use with clients all the time is the AVERS acronym, that emotions must be acknowledged, validated, expressed, and released.
Released.
For us.
That's a big one people get stuck on.
Yeah.
Well, and honestly, there's great data that says cancer is most often informed by unexpressed emotion, unreleased emotion, and that's most often rage, right? And that we all try to say, like, I'm not a rageful person, I don't have that in me, but what we resist persists, right? And so one of the things I've found has been active breath work with screaming into a pillow. Like, so I'll just be like, Amanda, I need a timeout. Yeah, no, I'll happily link you to some of ours, of our meditation scripts for that. But I'll say, Amanda, I need to have a timeout. Like, I need to put myself in timeout. I'll go into my bedroom, do some active 3-part breath, and just scream and come out a different person. right? Come back
Yeah.
much closer to my how I prefer to show up in the world. And to that end, breathwork has been really helpful for me. Can you talk about some of the tools that you found helpful to cope with stress or to heal your hurts caused by the stress of becoming a parent during the pandemic?
Um, I did a lot of swimming. Swimming is what I always go back to. I grew up a swimmer. I teach swim lessons. I've been a swim coach. But it took me a really long time to realize, I think the reason that I love it is because swimming is breath work.
Yes. Yes.
I was like sitting there one day and I was like, oh, that's why I love swimming.
Yes.
It absolutely is.
Because it's the regulated breathing. And I'm like, oh my God, that's why it like calms me down so much. It's not even like, it doesn't matter how much yardage I do or anything, but even just like, 20, 30 minutes just swimming back and forth will really help me out a lot. So I did that for a while. And then I did a lot of walks. We were really big as a walk family when Jack was newer, I would say between 0 and 4 months, because I was afraid to do any other like big activity. I had some injuries from the birth that I had to take a little time to heal. Um, but I don't know if this is going to make sense to a lot of people, but working.
Mm.
Um, and my business is a really, really fun outlet for me. It brings me a lot of joy to create community for people and to create these events and to look back in the middle of them and be like, oh, I did this. So, giving myself the time and the space to find and fall in love with that passion again. I started hosting paid events again. I was just doing the free yoga on the cliffs for a long time, but um, I got back into doing paid events and doing the winery classes and the flower field classes. And really, I feel like when I got to the flower field classes, that's when I started to hit my groove again because I felt like I was really doing something that was not only helping me, but I was giving space to other people. And that makes me feel like I can exhale.
I think you're speaking to something really powerful that I was just writing about in the course that I'm building, the Mama Mantra, called Ikigai. Have you heard of this?
No.
It's a Japanese term. Basically, there's 4 different quadrants that you use to determine kind of like what is your purpose in the world. And it's this culmination of, you're going to have to help me because I know you know about this too. It's like what you love, what you like or what you're passionate about, how you help others, and what makes money. Is that right? Are those
Yeah,
the 4?
exactly.
That's
Okay.
it. That's
And it's
that
like
is it.
you found your ikigai, and that is so much more than work, right? Like that.
Mhm.
I mean, you shine when you talk about
And
it. People
it's
are drawn to you
different
when you
than
do it.
it's different than the old adage, if you love what you do,
You'll never
you'll
work a day
never
in your
work a
life.
day in your
Yeah.
life. It
Yeah,
is.
it feels spiritual to me. Like I feel like I am being pulled and guided by something else
Yeah.
when I'm doing it. Does that make
Yes.
sense?
Absolutely.
Absolutely
And
it does.
Ikigai actually builds resilience. So you
Yeah.
can go through what you were describing, even as these traumatic times where, or these stressful times where maybe you're not bringing any money in, or where you can't quite see your vision, or you're needing extra help from your partner. And it sounds like you have this extra thing out there that inspires you so much that you can keep going.
Yeah.
And this is actually studied by there's many blue zones throughout the world. Blue zones are the places in the world that have the longest lifespan and longevity. And one of them is Ogamimi, Japan, where the people there almost all practice Ikigai. And they have the largest amount of centenarians in the world per capita than anywhere else. So good
I believe
news is
it.
even though
You're
you're
going to live a
stressed,
long time.
because you're swimming, because you're walking, and because you're living with purpose and helping
Yes.
people connect with their authentic center, you are likely to live longer. So, and
Hey.
on that note of feeling spiritually pulled to exercise your business as a method of creating community and fostering healing, Can you speak to that? Because that didn't just come from nowhere, right? That has to be a series of signs that you're noticing and a process of becoming. Can you kind of walk us through what that looks like from becoming a student to becoming a teacher training and then teacher and then an entrepreneur? And what kind of can you speak to about pulling you in that direction?
I think more than yoga, I have been pulled to community building types of things because I felt like a loner my whole life. Looking back at my extracurricular activity choices, looking back at the classes I enjoyed in college, I have a social work major. After I graduated college, my first job was in campaigns, and my job was to organize volunteers in the community and get people going for whatever cause it was or candidate it was that we were working on. When I worked in restaurants, I organized the special events because I loved helping people create their baby showers or wedding showers or birthday parties or whatever it was. And so it's been this long and winding path for me to really fully appreciate and accept that my path and reason for being is to connect people. And when I embraced that and stepped into it fully, when I just started Yoga John as a full-time business, it was like I clicked into the track I was supposed to be on my whole life. I wasn't resisting like riding a train through the dirt anymore. I was finally on the rails, and we were going downhill, and it was easy because it was finally where I was supposed to be. And it was like my life, and whoever or whatever it is that's out there was like, oh, she finally figured it out. Let's give her a little bit of an easy break here, you know? But that's truly how it feels because the ideas are effortless. The community is effortless. The ability to see marketing campaigns and content creation and going out to dinner with my husband and thinking we should have a yoga event here, like that stuff just rolls out. And that's really, I think it's a life path situation that's finally being embraced. And the community that I've made at those yoga classes and on those cliffs, I am constantly in awe of what I did to bring them there. But then I step back and I'm like, oh, I don't know if this was really all me, but I'm going to enjoy it. I'm just kind of one step in front of the other, following that gut feeling. And this is where I've landed. So,
And I love that you spoke to number one, your pain can become your purpose in so many ways because there's so many people that I believe that are out there struggling, feeling alone in their pain, and maybe their feelings of isolation and loneliness that would benefit from the idea of becoming selfless, the idea of creating community where you might not have had it growing up. And the other thing that you spoke to that I love so much is the idea of ease and effortlessness, that when you find your path, often you could overthink it. You could even like get in your own way by trying to, move off the tracks for a moment. But when you find your path, it often is just easy. It's free flowing.
yeah.
It's what you love to do.
Yeah, I remember like there were a few organizers and campaigns that I looked up to and that I'm still connected with on social media. But I remember looking at this one girl and thinking, man, she's really meant to do this. She is like meant for this gig. And things would appear to come to her easily in that career path that weren't coming to me as easily. And when it was happening, I was in my early 20s and I wasn't kind of like aware enough to get outside of the jealousy. At first, it was jealousy. Now that I look back, I'm like, oh, she had just found her path. And I was watching someone on their path and jealous that they found it and not realizing that's why I was jealous. It wasn't about the work or the promotions. It was that she was just like grooving in that role. And that's what I wanted. I wanted a role that I could get into and be like, this is it.
Yeah. And I think it's really, really important for those of you listening who might not have found your path to hear what Jackie's saying right now. Because number one, she's been there. Number two, jealousy might have gotten in the way of her own process of awareness and becoming. And number three, a follow-up. What would your advice be to someone who might be struggling, feeling like they're stuck or not on their path? What would your advice to them be?
Um, are you listening to your gut? Are you really listening to your gut? Are you really though? Like, really ask yourself that. And I know I repeat that question 3 times, but there were times in my life where I thought that I was, and I wasn't. I was not listening to my gut. Deep, deep, deep down, it didn't feel quite right. And I went ahead with it anyway. And the struggle and the anxiety and the missteps would happen, and I would feel confused about it. But now I see that it's because I wasn't going in the right direction, and that's why those things were happening. Because if I was truly clicked in, I would be able to kind of like feel differently. Like, mistakes are going to happen even when you're clicked in, but you're able to kind of roll through them a little bit differently and think about them differently when you're in a way that you're, or on a path that you're supposed to be on, instead of, dwelling on it and having a pity party. And, not that I think you shouldn't, be upset about things happening. And, I don't want to invalidate anybody's feelings, but if you're in a position or a relationship and things keep popping up that aren't feeling good, your body knows what your mind is refusing to see. So listen to your gut and, take a chance, because sometimes that chance that maybe you're nervous about, but it feels good. It's like a good nervousness. That's the path you're supposed to be on. And it's a little bit scary, but everything you want is on the other side of that fear. And taking that leap, like, I didn't want to teach my first yoga class. I was terrified. You know how many times I almost canceled that thing? Oh my God, I almost canceled that yoga class so many times. Same thing with the swim lessons. I was like, I can't believe I told these people I could do this. Like, I don't know how to book swim lessons. Like, what was I thinking? I'm overwhelmed. And then I would get through that first like chunk of anxious, excited, scary feelings in the beginning of starting something. And I'd get to the other side and I'd be like, oh, I got this. And that's the feeling you're looking for. If you feel like you're constantly pushing back against something, it might be time to reevaluate and look for a path with maybe a little less resistance in the beginning. That you know what I'm talking about, like that feeling that's like in you. You're going to face resistance, but like, how deep is it? Is it like there's barbed wire up and you really shouldn't go down this path? Or like maybe there's like some sticks you got to move out of the way? Like, what's the difference here? So, it's the gut feeling thing. I swear we're the only animals that don't listen to our gut instinct.
True that.
And it
I'll also
shows
talk
up in
to
life.
take the conversation full circle. I'll say that kids almost always trust their intuition, right? Because they have nothing else.
They sure do.
And
they know when somebody's not vibing.
Yeah.
To those of you that are alone or stuck or feel like you don't have a purpose or a path, my best advice would be to stop, spend quiet time, and ask yourself, are you actually taking time to even hear your intuition, or to ask the questions of where you are and where you want to be? That curiosity can be the pathway to open doors to a future that you might not have even ever thought of before.
I'd like to really add something to this. I know we're getting to the end here, but I did an exercise once where I wrote down all of the things I felt like I was supposed to be doing and I should be doing in my life for where I was. Because at this point in my life, I was very much in it wasn't supposed to be like this point. And I wrote down all the things I thought I should be doing and I was supposed to be doing. And after I was done making the list, the person I was working with said, who in your life has said those things to you that are on the paper? Is it your voice? And I had the biggest epiphany I've ever had in my life, that I was living out someone else's fears for me. And they were fears that were based in love, because they were, an elder to me and they wanted me to make the right choices. And sometimes we can push those things on kids and not know it and not realize it. But a lot of the things I wrote out about should be doing and supposed to be doing, and this is where I should be, and I blah, 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 blah. Those weren't things I wanted. Mm-hmm. And those were things that were running my life. And when I started the work to slowly let those things go, I was able to see more clearly what was making me truly happy and what I really wanted to do. So that's really kind of the final piece of that. If you're feeling stuck, what should you do and where should you go? Is it your voice you're listening to even? Because you're talking about slowing down and listening to the voice. But then when you hear it, whose voice is it? Make sure it's yours.
That's
Absolutely.
incredibly powerful.
And inspiring. I think more people would benefit from the insight that they are their own architect of their future, that they are the ones with the keys to the car. And oftentimes that quiet time of parsing the stories and the imprinting and the conditioning from the quietest voice inside your own head and inside your own self is necessary. And I don't think people take enough time to do that.
And you don't need to ask permission to do it either. That's a big one for people. No one's going to say, okay, now it's time. You got to, that's it. You make the choice and go, or you don't. That's it.
And I think that takes the conversation full circle, because
it really does. That's who I am as a person.
You are such a goer and a doer. And I think that people can benefit so greatly from your energy and your insights and your wisdom and honestly your vulnerability and your imperfection, right? Because I think through social media we get this perfected understanding of the world that is really just the highlight reel. And I think thank you so much, Amanda, and I thank you so much for showing up as unapologetically yourself. And I think that the world needs more authentic voices like you that can be voices of change making at the same time as being perfectly imperfect.
And Jackie, for the listeners, if they want to get in touch with you, if they happen to be in San Diego and want to hit up a yoga class, where is the best place for them to find you, like on social media?
On social media, probably Instagram. So it's yoga_John, JAWN, which is a Philadelphia term. If anybody's wondering, go ahead and Google it. It's a whole thing. But Yoga John is the name of my business, and yogajohn.com is my website. So those are two really great places. If you're coming and you want a private class, if you want to come join our community class, or if you have an idea, I'm always down to help. But come hang out, ego-free yoga, and it's free, and it's on a cliff. So maybe you'll see some dolphins if you don't like the yoga.
Well, thank you so much again. We really appreciate your time, your vulnerability, your honesty. I think you just spoke to so many important experiences that our listeners can share with. So thank you very much for that.
And we hope that you continue to shine your light in important and meaningful ways. And we look forward to seeing you next time we're in San Diego.
Yes, which hopefully is soon. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yes. All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Wow. What an episode. Thank you for listening. We hope you took some meaningful tools and skills that empower you to become your highest self in every way.
We also hope you'll help us spread our messages of solidarity, social support, and consciousness raising by subscribing to our YouTube channel @Mindful&Fit and offering us an honest 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts.
Doing so helps more people hear these important messages of love, healing, and becoming.
And as always, much love from the Johnson family. We hope you make today amazing,
just like you.